Okay, so v'achlu es habasar b'layla hazeh. So the Torah commands, referring here to the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, that the Jewish people should eat its meat on this night, tzli eish, roasted on fire, umatzos, together with matzos, al maroimim, together with maror, yochlu, they should eat it. So these are the three critical components of the Seder night, which we don't do because we don't have a Korban Pesach, we just represent it. But that's how it should be done, and God willing it will be done this year. So the Korban Pesach is eaten with the matzah and the bitter herbs. Biu mashmutan haruchnius, to understand the spiritual dimension now, shel shalosh mitzvot elo, with respect to these three mitzvahs, these three commandments, the Korban Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. Shalein amru chazal, our sages say, this is quoted in the Haggadah, of course, Kol mi sheli amar shlosha dvarim elu bepesach, if a person did not make reference to these three things at the Seder night, lo yotze dei chavato, he did not discharge his obligation. And what are the three things that he has to make reference to? The three things mentioned in this very verse: Korban Pesach, the sacrifice, matzah, umorah, and the bitter herbs. The three things. So what's the spiritual meaning of these three things? Inasmuch that we need to appreciate that, like every Yom Tov, but I guess particularly Pesach, that the spiritual dimension is the primary dimension. We have to see ourselves as if we went out of Egypt. Well, we're not in Egypt. And what does it mean to pretend we did go out of Egypt? Make believe. We weren't there. Most of us never even saw Egypt. So what does it mean to go out of Egypt? Obviously, it means it spiritually. It's a spiritual exodus that each one of us, we have to remember the story as well, the physical story, but it's a spiritual exodus that each one of us is to undergo each year on Pesach, and for that matter every day, because we have to make reference to the exodus every day. So all of the components of the experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus, therefore all have first and foremost spiritual components, and this is one of them. Let's continue. B'shat Yetzias Mitzrayim, the time of the Exodus, Hafchu b'nei Yisrael la'am, the Jewish people became a people. Before that they were not a people. They were not even, well, they were one tribe essentially, several tribes. They had a common ancestry for the most part, but they weren't a people. Being identified as B'nai Yisrael, as a people, that happens at the moment of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That is the birth of the Jewish people. The whole, metaphorically, the whole slavery, etc., is the birth pangs that are associated with birth. So the moment then, when we became a people, now it becomes necessary, not before, but only now, to provide, that God should provide, as it were, their spiritual needs, now as a people of God, a people representing Hashem, the chosen people, as it were, now are required all of the requirements, their spiritual needs, which are reflected in these three things we just identified. Therefore, he's now going to explain. Nitno lahem oz.
But no. We refer to them at that point as the Jewish people or as a people, because they really become Jewish people until Matan Torah, no?
Well, it's a process that starts at Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the birth, and Matan Torah is the maturation of it. Like birth, bar mitzvah, wedding, they're stages, but the birth is the critical point. So the birth of our people is then.
So like Matan Torah is kind of like the bris then.
That's
when you take on
the
covenant.
Yes, it's many dimensions. They did the bris before. Matan Torah is either bar mitzvah or marriage. It's both. The bris is really before. And therefore, they circumcised themselves in Egypt before they ate the Korban Pesach.
No, I just meant metaphorically.
Well, the fact that they did it physically
it's
means
not really Jewish until they take on Torah, right?
Yes.
They're still just a people. with a collective destiny.
So like any conversion, there's different stages. There's immersion in mikveh, there's the bris, there's the acceptance of the covenant. There's three parts of the package, which we actually learn from the Exodus, what happened after the Exodus. So again, Yetzias Mitzrayim is the birth, the whole process of becoming Jewish beginning, and then the stages, as you say, after that, culminating with the giving of the Torah. So already now, therefore, we need to get, just like a child is born, has got to be nourished. You don't have to worry about feeding them before. Then the child naturally feeds off the mother. Once the child is born, now an independent child's got to be fed. So now we need to be fed the spiritual diet unique to the Jewish people, and that's reflected in these three things. The matzah, the Korban Pesach, the matzah, and the maror. Now he's going to explain what these three components are. Therefore, it was then given to them, shalosh mitzvot elu, these three commandments. Shehem, we're going to see now that they correspond, keneged. They correspond, shloisha sugim klolim, three general categories, b'tzrachav shel adam, and a person's needs. And they are, bottom of the page now. Number one, matzah. Matzah, which is bread. Tzrochim chiyuniyim ve'achrechiyim. Bread represents the critical things we need in life to survive. Shebelado ma'adam ene yachol litkayim. A person can't live without it. So bread represents the staples in life without which a person cannot live. That's what bread represents. Two, maror. Yeah. No, good. Yirakot. You're listening. Vegetables. So what do vegetables represent? Tzrachim, they are needs. Sheinam hechrechiyim be'ofen buchlat. They supplement, but they're not absolute needs. Aval gam einam motrot shel mamash. But we wouldn't call them vegetables and fruit and so on. We wouldn't call them luxuries. They are critical for healthy living, but not for being alive. For being alive, bread is the symbol of the basic necessity, and vegetables is the symbol of
healthy.
That which augments and supplements and completes one's nutrition,
needs.
Nutritional supplementary needs and important ones. And then Korban Pesach, the Paschal lamb, basar, meat. These are tzrachim she'einam b'achrechim klal. These are not needs that are necessary at all. In fact, arguably, probably not so good for you, especially now current meat that's treated with all of these the animal, mind you, so are vegetables. At any rate, so meat represents luxury that not critical at all. V'heim bayim rak mitoch harchava. The Torah advises that meat should only be eaten in a state of expansiveness and luxury. In fact, we're told to eat meat once a week at most. Shabbat, really. The average person, the Talmud says, is advised not to eat meat during the week. So, Shabbat, because the Shabbat is a time of delight and pleasure and so on. So that's the appropriate time for indulgence in a healthy way, and that's what meat represents. Now, we just said now that it's eaten when mitoch harchava. Chava means expansiveness. That's when meat is eaten. Look in the brackets. K'maimer as Chazal, as our sages point out, the Torah when it says the laws of shechita, it prefaces by saying, Ki yarchiv Hashem b'alekechet guvulcha, when God will expand your border and you'll go into Israel, then the laws of consuming meat follow, the laws of shechita and removal of the blood and so on. So why is it associated with God will expand your border? Our sages say, Limtecha Torah derech eretz. The Torah is telling us a proper conduct. Shelo yochal adam basar, a person shouldn't eat meat as a staple. Ela leteyavon, it should be reserved as a kind of a luxury. When God will expand your border, that's what's hinted to that. All right. So conclusion. Help me, friends, in our summary. Matzah represents the staple, because it's a bread. Maror is a vegetable, represents that which augments, and meat represents the luxury. Lefi hezbezen, now we get a beautiful insight. Will also Yuvan understand Gamba hevdel bizmanan shel mitzvot elo. If you look at history, or more specifically epochs and eras in our history, in our life, in our history, we'll see the application of these three mitzvahs. As we said before, at the outset, we don't eat the Korban Pesach today. And we'll see about the Maror as well. Let's see. If you look at the spiritual state, by that we mean in exile, not in exile, so we'll see how these three foods apply and how they change in their application depending on the state of the spiritual state of the Jewish people. He'll now explain what he means. Mitzvot achilat matzah, the obligation to eat matzah. So that is min Torah, that's a scriptural obligation, b'chol makom u'b'chol zman. In all times and places, whether the temple stands, whether we eat the Korban Pesach or not, whether we live in Israel or in exile, the obligation to eat matzah is universal. We understand now why spiritually, because it represents the staple, the basic, and that's obviously universal. Since we're talking about bread, which is a staple need, one cannot survive without the basics, so therefore this is universally incumbent. Okay, let's continue. Mitzvot achilas maror. Now what about eating maror? It does say in the Torah to eat maror, but the fact is that nowadays it's not scripturally mandated, because the maror is contingent on the Korban Pesach. No Korban Pesach, no maror. So why are we eating maror at our Seder? It's no longer applicable. The sages enacted it. It's rabbinically commanded, but to remember that there was such a commandment, but not scripturally. Since we're on the subject, we should point this out, that at the Seder night, someone just told me, in fact, they did a count, there's like 44 commandments to be fulfilled or something. They analyzed all the details. That's a big, and how they got to that, I don't know. But this much I can tell you, that the rituals and the observance of the Seder night fall under three different categories, like all commandments do. Scriptural commandments, rabbinic law, and custom. And we need to know what's what, because you've got to put the right emphasis on what's most critical. The menu at the meal is the least significant part of your night. In fact, the meal altogether is the least significant, particularly since if you eat the proper amounts of matzah and maror that you really should, there's little room to eat anything else. You can have really a light meal, but an elaborate meal is really not possible if you do it properly. That's not even a custom. The meal doesn't even fall into custom. That's just whatever, tradition, Ashkenaz, Sfard. It is custom. I should say it is custom, but within customs there are many levels. There's many levels of it with custom. Customs that go back very far, that are rooted in rabbinic law and Torah law. And then there are customs that just evolved culturally, because of where people lived. So they eat this food, eat that food. So within customs there's many, many levels. I'm just pointing out that, the food that we eat at the Seder is custom, and within minhag, it's not the high level custom either. What are the biblical things? What are we scripturally mandated that the Torah mandates universally? You're commanded to do this tonight. It's a few things at the Seder. We just learned one of them, and that is the matzah. So we're commanded to eat matzah. This is critical that it be done properly. It's got to be done at the right time, in the right way, and using the right kind of matzah. The matzah should be shmura matzah that was scrupulously watched, that there's no contact of water with the grain from the moment that it was harvested. That's not an easy thing to do. It's in a farm, there's rain, there's silos, needs supervision. That's why it's so expensive. It's a lot of very intensive labor involved in the shmur matzah, and it's handmade as well. So there's the shmur matzah. Then there's when to eat it. It's got to be after nightfall, presenting a unique challenge in Canada after daylight savings. It's very late. I think the earliest, I remember the exact time, it would be around 8:30 probably, but just check the calendar to be certain. And then there's the amount. As we pointed out in the past, the person can throughout the Seder, if he nibbles and just eats and pecks at the matzah and ends up eating, 2 pounds, it's possible no commandment was done.
2 pounds?
Even if he ate, that's even 2 pounds of matzah. Or a pound, whatever it is. The point I'm making is it's possible to consume throughout the night a lot of matzah and no commandment was done. In fact, blessings were made in vain because he made a bracha and did not fulfill the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is to eat a meal of matzah in one shot, uninterrupted, without speaking, within the space of a few minutes after nightfall with the appropriate blessings leading to the left.
Does that have to be the shmar matzah? Because I know at these large tables, they have the 3 shmar matzah on the table. They hide the ikoman, and then the time to do the mitzvah.
They hide the what?
They hide the piece.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
And
Yeah.
then at the time of doing the mitzvah, they have the boxes of matzah.
They had the machine matzah.
The machine matzah.
The machine matzahs can be good too also. I mean, there's good supervision. There's many shmura machine matzah too. So one can fulfill one's obligation with machine matzah without question. It's better to use the handmade matzah for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that the matzahs have to be made with the intent of, they have to have their intent that they're being produced to eat at the Seder night. So this whole debate, machines can't have intent. So some would argue, yeah, but the person who runs the machine does, but it still means hands-on. It's not being made directly. So that's one consideration. The other is also, when it's made by hand, what happens is every 18 minutes, the papers that they roll the matzah on, the rollers and their hands are washed. It's a complete transformation every 18 minutes. The machine is the same machine stamping, and there's the fear that if a bit of dough sticks to the machine, after 18 minutes it starts to leaven, and that's a problem. So there are ways that they get around that as well. They clean it, and whatever, machinery can be very efficient. But still, at the end of the day, it's better to use hand, but certainly under proper supervision, machine matzah qualifies, but it has to be shmura matzah. Year-round matzah, the boxes will say not to be used for the Seder or Pesach if it wasn't made, with all of this attention to detail, etc. But the point is, you have to eat the right amount of matzah. So since we're on the subject, we'll just address this, some practical stuff. The minimum amount is a meal, and our sages estimated what is a meal. A meal is that which would satisfy the average person, irrespective of their height or weight. Which is the average person, and they determined that it's an ounce of matzah. An ounce of food qualifies for a minimum meal. That translates in terms of how much matzah. So it would be the average hand-baked matzah is between about a third of a matzah, depending on the weight and the size, between a third and a little more perhaps. And a machine matzah, which is lighter, it's more like a half. Half a matzah. Now, that is the minimum. But as I said before, if you do it optimally, you're eating way more than that, and there's not much room to eat your meal. Let me tell you why. Because this is Torah law. Now I'm telling you rabbinic law. It's not even rabbinic law. It's rabbinic suggestion. Rabbinic law has many levels as well. Rabbis say you should, you have to, or it's better. And within better, it's how much better. There's all kinds of levels you have to know. This is not, it's not simple. Many gradations of all these things. So I'm giving you like this rabbinic law that says in the code of Jewish law, that if you are able, you should do the following. And what's that? So listen to how much matzah a person has to consume. Optimally. The first time you eat, it's optimum to eat 2 size ounces. So it's 2/3. or whatever it is. Why two? Because effectively you're fulfilling two mitzvahs when you eat the matzah the first time. You're fulfilling the mitzvah of eating matzah. You're also fulfilling the mitzvah, rabbinic law, of having two breads, lechem mishnah, the ordinary mitzvah to break bread on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Every Yom Tov we have two breads that we make a bracha over and eat right at the beginning of the meal. Tonight's no different. So that's a rabbinic law in its own right. So you're actually fulfilling two mitzvahs. The mitzvah eat matzah tonight, and the mitzvah that's Yom Tov tonight, and to eat bread. Now, okay, it has to be poor man's bread, unleavened, but bread because it's Yom Tov. So ideally, you're eating right there the first time, two. The sandwich, it's...
how does it relate to quantity, though? I mean,
it's 2/3.
Right, but on Shabbos when you're eating your two breads,
it's only one mitzvah, so it's one kazayis you eat.
Right.
Now, on Shabbos,
But you're only eating part of one bread. You're not eating two breads.
But it doesn't matter. It's one kazayis. It could be ideally you can't have it from two matzahs because 2/3. Well, you could have it from one matzah.
But on Shabbos, are you obligated
Just
to
one-
eat a certain amount?
Yes,
of
same
bread?
thing. Same thing. Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, you have to have that when you make the bracha. Then you should right away eat the kazayis.
No, but a certain amount. It
Yes,
has to
the
be-
amount, the weight of an ounce.
Okay.
Same thing. So two mitzvahs are done now. So you eat two kazayis.
So translates
And-
into about a third each, which is
2/3.
2/3.
2/3 of
one
no,
third, 1/3.
Yeah, since you're using two matzahs, one represents the Korban Pesach, one represents the matzah, one represents the ordinary, regular Yom Tov obligation. So the custom is to take a kazayis from each of the matzahs. Now, obviously, you can't share that with everybody at the table. From your matzah, but you have to have enough matzah to supply everyone at the table. Some have the custom to give a little bit of the matzah, the main matzah, the Seder plate. But it's not so practical to do that if you have a lot of guests. Everybody has their own matzah and they do it. Anyway, so point out, it's already a lot, 2/3 of a matzah. It's quite significant. That's two meals right there. Then we eat matzah later on, the sandwich. Now, that's only 1 ounce because it's just representing that's rabbinic law, but not high level mandate either. As we say in the Haggadah, we do that to remember the way it was eaten during temple times, as we just read the verse. Matzah together with bitter herbs, together with a paschal lamb, was all eaten together. That's 1 ounce. But then at the end of the meal, when you eat afikomen, ideally, again 2 ounces. Why two at the end of the meal? Because at the end of the meal we're eating the matzah in lieu of the sacrifice, but there are actually two. There are two sacrifices, at least, that a Jew brought on Erev Pesach that he ate at his table, represented on your Seder plate by the shank bone and the egg. The shank bone represents the paschal lamb. The egg represents the holiday offering that was brought every holiday. And moreover, the Torah says that the paschal lamb should be eaten not as your primary meal. You've got to be satisfied, and then you eat the final piece of meat. So if you want to eat meat, and it's a mitzvah on Yom Tov to eat meat, the main meal was the Korban Chagiga, the festive offering, represented by the egg. Why the egg? Because the egg is the bread of mourning. We don't have a temple, so we represent the fact that there's no temple by the food of a mourner. And of course, the shank bone represents God's arm. It's the arm or the leg. God took us out with an outstretched arm. That's the symbol of the Korban Pesach. But anyway, so we're eating this at the end of the Seder. We are really remembering the two sacrifices that we are now symbolically remembering by eating matzah in its place, the afikomen. So since it's two sacrifices, it's really two kazesim.
What if you eat the egg at the start of your meal? Would that count as?
No, that we eat it. No, the egg actually is the mourning. That the egg reminds us that we don't have it. It's the opposite. The afikomen is we're eating the afikomen in place of the sacrifice, and the egg is we don't have it.
You
We're
can have it
mourning.
in wine, no?
Sorry. For some people, mind you, that's the best part of the meal, the egg and the salt water. I've been told that. It's just the simplest food, and many people find it quite delicious. Anyway, That's kind of funny. All the hard work that the woman puts into making the Seder, they like the egg in the salt water. That's the highlight. Anyway, so do the math now, the arithmetic. If you're doing this optimally, 2/3 plus 2/3 plus 1/3, that's 5/3 of matzah. Then we haven't mentioned the maror. The maror is eaten twice, on its own and in the sandwich. So there too, it's an ounce, or at least 3/4 of an ounce. That's quite a lot of maror.
Is it enough to have your mother-in-law at the table? No?
Huh?
Is it enough to have your mother-in-law at the table?
To remember the. That's a good question, Michael. So that's a lot of food, and you're drinking 4 cups of wine or grape juice. Now here too, since we're on the subject, you're not sipping; it's drinking. Each time you drink, it's like a whole meal. Drinking, and our sages determined how much is that. It's a revius, which translates as about 3.5 ounces, or at least the majority of that. The majority of 3. So the majority of that, it's not that much. It's whatever it is, 3.5 ounces, like almost 2 ounces. But ideally, you should be drinking the whole cup, not the majority. It's only if you can't. So you're drinking 3 times at least 3.5 ounces of grape juice or wine. It's also very filling. It's hard to tell you if you do this optimally, have a light meal, but it can't be a heavy meal. And you have to leave place at the end for eating 2/3 of a matzah. Just think of that. Which is why our sages say you got to go into the Seder hungry, because there's lots to eat. It's forbidden to eat a big meal on that of Pesach. Certainly after midday.
I'm going to start saving up now.
You start starving, you mean?
Yeah.
But let's remember this. So what I just told you now is the optimum, and it was a combination of custom, but high-level custom and rabbinic law. And also not necessarily the highest demand of rabbinic law, but minimally to fulfill the Seder night scripturally, minimally is what you want to make sure everybody does this as follows, that after nightfall everybody gets at least 1/3 of the shmor matzah, the hand-bake, or a half of close to a half of a machine matzah. After nightfall, everybody makes the 2 blessings together, and then everybody eats it without speaking till the end. Men are obligated to lean to the left. If they don't, they've got to eat it again. Women are not obligated to, but men are. Anybody over bar mitzvah. So these instructions have to be said, and they've got to be told. No one speak till it's done. So munch, munch, crunch, crunch. That's what you hear and get your Seder. It's up to the leader of the Seder to point this out. This is very important what we're about to do, and you should tell them as well what it says in the Zohar. That it says in the Zohar like this, that matzah, eating matzah, nurtures and strengthens faith and health. If you like, soul and body. The first night, soul, second night, body. So literally by eating the matzah properly, we take it in, it becomes part of us. We are ingesting a commandment, and it's nurturing our neshama and strengthening our physical health. The Alter Rebbe, and our Rebbe did this too. I mean, it sounds, if it'd be an isolated story, it would challenge credibility, but it's not. It's one stories in tens of thousands, or maybe much more than that. When people were ill, Alter Rebbe and our Rebbe did the same. Sometimes we give from matzah from the Seder. They should take a little bit of matzah. It's a spiritual thing for physical illness. So this is a great carrot at the end of the stick. You tell people you eat the matzah, and it strengthens your soul. Faith. You know what faith means? It means that whatever we face in life, God willing, it should all be positive and wonderful. But if a person has deep faith, he can not only withstand, but actually grow from the challenges and help others grow. It's a very powerful component of our being, is faith. It's our deepest component. Keeps us grounded and deep and connected, and we don't fall apart. And then physical health, for sure that's a good thing we all want. So that's something you can tell there are people attending, that this is a wonderful mitzvah that has so much benefit. But ultimately we do it, Hashem is commanding us, and the privilege on this night to carry out His commandment. Yeah?
Men and women?
Men and women equally. Everybody over and bar and bas mitzvah. So that's the first of the scriptural laws. We'll get back to all of this later. We're in the middle of our discussion, but this is important. The second, on the same par, as eating the matzah, scripturally mandated, of course, is the story of Passover. We've got to talk about the story, we've got to discuss it, and we've got to talk about these three things, actually. Pesach, the korban, the sacrifice, matzah, the matzah, and the maror. We should talk about spiritual freedom, going out of our own boundaries. You'll remember, we always talk about this every year, Mitzrayim means the word meitzar, boundary. To properly observe Passover is to challenge, each one should challenge ourselves to go beyond our own personal limits where we've decided I'm happy where I'm at, or I excuse my behavior, this is my nature, this is my nurture, and I can't change. You can. Pesach gives us the ability to break habits, behavior, and break even achievements which were good up to till now. We can go further. That's a true liberation. It's a true going out of personal Egypt. But that's got to be explained in the context of the whole story. That's a Torah obligation.
Rabbi,
Number two, yes.
isn't there a time limit, the first Seder?
Yeah, the first day we should try and eat the matzah before midnight, as they were commanded in Egypt, and thereafter to eat the to have eaten the korban and so on, have completed the seder by
That
midnight.
includes the afikomen.
Yeah, first night, particularly the afikomen.
Even though we moved the clock?
Particularly the afikomen, because the well, it would be the
Isn't
real
it the
midnight,
Halachik midnight?
the halachic midnight, which would mean 12 o'clock, which would
Still
mean
12?
no, that would mean
Later, no?
1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right.
It means 1 o'clock. It's particularly the afikomen, because that's what represents the korban Pesach, and the korban Pesach had to be eaten before midnight. So we're not worried about the first matzah; it's really the final matzah, which is good news. You got to speed things up. I was told somebody yesterday that his grandfather finishes the seder 5 a.m. even the first night. Didn't worry about the midnight thing. Okay, 'cause that's the optimum thing. What?
I said it's a lot of matzah.
Well,
It's a long seder.
A long time.
No,
Anyway, so another Torah law again is, so this matzah is telling the story of the Exodus, and the third thing, according to some opinions, is praise of Hashem, which is the Hallel, the praise that we praise Hashem and thank Him. That's not just songs that we have a good time and enjoy, but it's really an obligation as part of the Seder night. So that's the first thing, like a priority. Matzah engage people in the story and the songs of praise. Whether you sing it or not is not the point, but that they should be said. The second degree, rabbinic law. This is now rabbinic law. They mandated. They didn't say you should. No, they didn't say it's optimum like other things I mentioned, but we command this from the sages, is the eating of maror. The sages enacted that to remember the fact that we used to eat maror scripturally. We shouldn't forget that. And remember Jewish suffering throughout the ages. And the 4 cups of wine. The 4 cups of wine. And these are, very high level rabbinic law. And let's bear in mind that most of the things we do throughout, Jewish life, much of it is from the sages. And the sages enacted this, empowered by the Torah. They didn't come out of nowhere. God mandated and instructed the sages to add rabbinic law as they see fit. And there's a whole process. And once we fulfill them, we're actually fulfilling scriptural law, because scriptural law says you have to follow the laws of the sages. So it's not independent of scriptural law. The Torah says you follow the laws of the sages, not to be treated lightly. So the 4 cups of wine, here too, there's a whole body of laws that define the 4 cups of wine. Ideally, it's red wine. It could be another color of wine, white, if a person has some allergy or doesn't even like the red wine. As you all know, if a person cannot drink alcohol, then grape juice. And there's even, I think I told you, if someone is allergic to, or even not allergic, just has can't drink grape juice. There's even tea is not meaningless, because the point being it should be a prestigious drink, a drink that is served to royalty when you'd have guests, and tea would qualify for that. Not juice, not water, but tea. That's like the bottom case. But here too, it's drinking, and each time we drink it, it's a meal in its own right. So this means as follows: the cups that everybody has have to be at least 3.5 fluid ounces. The shot glasses will not do. The 1 ounce cups, the 2 ounce cups. It's not a big cup, but really, I mean, we've had a hard time just finding this the right amount, because you want ideally everybody to drink the entire cup as well. And the big cups, it's just 5 ounce cups, 7 ounce cups. It's impossible. Now, if you don't drink the whole thing, you still fulfill the obligation. Shochat sells 3.5 cups, plastic cups.
100 for like $4.
Yeah.
Which cups are?
Yeah, that's the Shochat superstore. They're not easy to get. The plastic cups that we have here, no, these ones here that we have, these are 5. They're 5 ounce cups. It's not so big, but if you're having 4 cups of, it's a lot for a lot of people, especially elderly people. So you want to keep the cups small so that they can actually do it the best way, which is to drink the whole amount. But if you drink the majority of it, it's also good. And here too, the blessing should be made. It's drunk in one shot, and here too the men should lean to the left when they drink it. So that's the 4 cups of wine. And the maror, these things are mandated by the sages. And everything else that we do at the Seder is custom and important custom, etc., and lower levels of rabbinic law. But these are the main things. We just
when
identified.
the men drink the wine, what about the women? There's no obligation for them to lean to the left?
No. The whole lean to the left is only men. It's considered not to be so modest, to lean, to lie. Also, there are other, a student in the presence of his teacher doesn't lean either. So the leaning is really only obligatory on adult men, and mainly for the matzah. The wine too, but mainly for the matzah. As I said, if you don't lean to the left, the law is you have to re-eat the matzah. The whole question is because there's an interesting debate here, already at 9 o'clock. The question is whether leaning is the sages enacted leaning. It doesn't say, that's rabbinic law. It doesn't say the Torah to lean to the left. The sages enacted because it's a sign of freedom, etc. So not leaning, is it because you didn't, let's rephrase that. Is leaning an independent mitzvah that the sages enacted and said that you should lean when you fulfill the eating of matzah? Or is it integral? Did they enact it as integral to the way you eat matzah? So if you didn't lean, is it you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of leaning, or you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah as the sages enacted it? Either way, scripturally, if a person ate matzah, well, even without leaning, he fulfilled the obligation, even an adult. The question is whether he didn't fulfill the rabbinic law of matzah, or he didn't fulfill the rabbinic law of leaning. That's the question.
So then just finish the lean, then lean.
But they enacted to lean while eating.
But you said before that if you didn't lean, you have to re-eat the
Yeah, rabbinic law.
Higher level.
That's the rabbinic law. But the main thing is to eat matzahs. That's why Chabad tries to give out the shmura matzah to people, because that's the scriptural mandate. The rest of it is rabbinic law and so on, and it's encouraged. We should do it. As I said, there's so many mitzvahs to be done that night. And let's remember that Pesach night is the birth of our people, and every year on Pesach we are all undergoing the spiritual birth. And the birthing process is delicate, critical, and it's the foundation of our life. A child coming out of the womb, you press the wrong place, God forbid, it's permanent damage. It's very, very delicate. This is the most critical moment in our life, is the birthing moment. So you want to do that properly and augment that with everything that we can do. So we'll try and do it.
You
Okay.
mentioned karpas. Is that rabbinic or minhag?
Oh, karpas. And that it's rabbinic law.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's dipping in karpas. No. Yeah, it's like a lower level of rabbinic law. They're all quasi-custom. You should do it, but it's not the same level as drinking 4 cups of wine and breaking the afikam, all the things we do. It's all the sages all enacted that. But not as have to. You should do.
Benching is a have to also. Right?
Yeah, benching, grace after meals, like any time, that's scriptural law. Yeah, that's a scriptural law. Good point. Yeah, that's not unique to the Seder.
Can we switch to grape juice after 3 glasses of wine?
Yeah, well, it's better.
Because I can't take it anymore.
So then what you should do,
Sick.
so I'll tell you what you should do. Chacham eina beroisha, the wise person, his eyes is in his head. What you should do rather is all four of them mix the wine and grape juice, so that the last 10 can also have. There's many levels, pure wine throughout. The other extreme would be pure grape juice, and in between is wine and grape juice. Better the majority wine and then just under 50% grape juice. If you do that, you'll be able to do it 4 times. And if your cup is a 3.5 ounce cup, it's a long time, but it's a few hours of the Seder. You can manage it. You got to plan this.
Like these big cups. Every time I get stuck with a big cup.
So you got to get the small cups.
You became a people in whose eyes?
I can't afford $4.
No. Is it true that
Okay.
Moses really said, does it translate exactly?
Jacob has
Yeah,
a
what?
sponsor.
Did Moses say, does it translate exactly? Let
Jacob, look after
Yeah, that's
fellow
it.
So they
clan.
considered them
It's
a
a fellow
people.
clan.
And the Egyptians considered them a people before.
He's saying that in the context of the Exodus. Now it's happening.
But it's before they left, so he said, let my
It's now it's happening. It's not like we didn't have, as descendants of Abraham, the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt. They were called the children of Israel.
Passover wine.
Didn't explain. Here's really the critical point. Before the Exodus, you're going to remember because we discussed this. Any member who said, "I'm not part of the Jewish people, I'm out," was out. Once the moment of the Exodus, that's not an option. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew forever. So God kind of chose us, sealed it. It was all on potential, but you can still walk away, like any other faith. You don't want to be a Christian. You're not a Christian.
Right.
The church will say you're not a Christian.
God sealed it at
Yeah,
the Exodus.
it's important to remember this. And all other faiths work like the way it was before. If you affiliate with this faith and this, good, then you're part of the group. If you renounce it, you're out, and you're out as from the perspective of the church or Islam or whatever it is. Unique to Judaism is once you're a Jew, that happens at the Exodus. Born Jewish forever. That's a unique kind of change.
Thank you.